as it chokes the life out of the natural world. And it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it hasn't been that way for more than 99% of human existence on this planet. And so I say, wherever you are, offer resistance. If not now, when? When will you feel the need to fight back? Stall the spread of this cancer before it's too late, before the last remaining wild places have been chopped down, mined, blown up, and commodified in the name of economic progress. The end is at hand. Now it is the task of those of us who recognize the insanity of the system to find each other, to spread the spirit of resistance, to keep a steady purpose, and to allow ourselves no rest until all the implements of war against the earth are dismembered. Because when this wave of resistance travels over the land, when it becomes the very air we breathe, when more and more of us join the cause, then with all our effort, this cannibal sickness we call civilization will be shaken off, and the earth will persist with enough health to be able to support life. And that is how we will make the world a better place. Thank you. I'm not sure when this room is not available anymore, but we have time for a few questions probably.
So clearly you're obviously like an effective, not maybe not effective, but like ideal way of trying to change the perception or mindset would be trying to get in touch with like, big industries and whatnot, ones that have a lot of capital or power, coal or what's been some effective, education or rallies or protests that you guys have done in the past? What's worked? Like what have you guys personally done or as an organization?
Well, one experience that we had last year was, so the question was, what kind of things have we participated in that have been effective? I've been an activist for a long time, more than 10 years, which may be surprising because I'm young, but I've been doing stuff for a long time. And one thing that I've seen over and over again is people doing things that are not succeeding and continuing to try those tactics over and over again. And that's the definition of insanity, right? You're trying the same tactics and expecting a different result. One experience that we in Fertile Ground had last year was we found out that there's a pipeline, an oil pipeline that runs through Bellingham that carries oil from the Alberta tar sands. If you haven't heard of the tar sands, it's the largest industrial project in the history of the world. It's an oil extraction project in Alberta, and it's not liquid oil in the ground. It's oil that's suspended in sand, in sediment, and it's extracted using incredibly destructive methods. Canada is now the largest single supplier of U.S. oil, over 10%. And a big percentage of that oil comes through this pipeline that runs right through Bellingham. Some of it goes to the refineries in Whatcom County and some down to the Anacortes refineries. And so we found out that the agreement between the city and the pipeline company was coming up for renewal. So we decided to go to the city and show that we didn't want this in our backyard, that we didn't want to participate in this destructive project, that we didn't want our city to assent to this this tar sands project running beneath our streets. And what we found through many city council meetings, meeting with other groups, networking, was that we have no right locally to say that that oil cannot flow here because it's an issue of interstate commerce. And according to the Constitution, interstate commerce can only be regulated by the federal government. Therefore, local municipalities and counties have no authority to say no. And that's something that we've seen again and again all over the country, is local communities wanting to keep these destructive things from happening, wanting to keep these corporations out. But due to 200 years of the expansion of corporate rights, and which continues today, the latest is Citizens United, which allows corporations to give as much money as they want to politicians. But I have a corporate activist, a friend of mine, and he says that's just that's the icing on the cake. of corporate rights, because they've basically appropriated all the rights that people have and more have now been given to corporations. So when we tried to say, we don't want this here, the city came back to us and said, we actually cannot refuse this, and if we do, we're going to get sued. And we'll just end up having to have the pipeline come anyway, and we'll end up having to pay for the legal costs as well. So it's a lose-lose situation. And so again, this is an experience that we see again and again and again, is that the system itself is set up to facilitate resource extraction. I think not many people know that the original 13 colonies of the United States were each crown chartered corporations. They were chartered corporations, chartered by the king of England. And they were here to facilitate resource extraction. And that process has continued. The original corporations that were the states became colonies, they became independent, and then they became the United States. But the process of colonial resource extraction has continued. And so that's something that we see, is that the rules are set up for those in power to facilitate resource extraction, to facilitate profit. And there's nothing that we can do to fight that if we're operating within their rules. And so that's the entire point of this presentation, is that if we continue to operate within the boundaries that they set for us, we will fail again and again and again. I don't know if that answers your question.
That was good. I mean, what would be, so now having known that response, like, what do you think would be the next step? Like, what would be the next, if you're dealing with just that issue or that company, or like, what do you think would be
an effective response?
Yes, an alternative,
Well, to stop it. It's the most effective thing is to stop it. And there's a lot that I could say here that I probably shouldn't say as to what I think maybe could happen. But it's going to be up to, in our vision, local communities determining for themselves what are the most destructive manifestations of civilization, and a pipeline carrying tar sands product is surely one of them. And like I said, we don't even have a culture right now to facilitate a sort of underground railroad for people to safely and effectively stop these things on their own. We don't even have that. Maybe people who are very creative, and I can't see it happening right now, but I'm not the most creative person in the world, so I could see people doing it even without a cultural support blanket. And what does that cultural support blanket look like? I want to read more up on the abolitionist movement to see what underground railroads did look like for them. I want to look up the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta. They're doing a similar thing. They're trying to stop oil production in the Niger Delta, and they're doing so through, they tried to do nonviolent, please stop this, you're destroying our water. For 25 years, that didn't work, so they took up militant action, and they dismantled refineries. They even took hostages of oil company execs, and they've reduced oil production in the Niger Delta by 40% or more since that time, which is outstanding. So I can't give you a specific answer for that pipeline, but
I think the short answer is that we need people to put their bodies between those in power and the remaining fossil fuels and the remaining wild places. And that, that manifests in a lot of different ways. But I mean, the people who are doing this civil disobedience in Appalachia against mountaintop removal, I'm a huge supporter of that action, because those people are putting a lot more on the line than anyone who just goes on Facebook and clicks like, and then they consider themselves environmentalists. So, I think we need that, and we need a lot more, because, this extraction is happening around the world, and, the easy oil is gone. The gushers are all gushed out, and so now it's down to the deep water drilling. We've seen what happens when you do that. Now they're trying to do it in the Arctic. They just gave a new permit for drilling in the Gulf of Mexico to Chevron, and they're going to the tar sands and the shale sands and natural gas fracking. And these are the most destructive versions of fossil fuels. They're it's like this culture has been smoking crack, and now this is the most disgusting, worst dirtiest fuel at the end, that this culture is, that's just going to keep it addicted for so much longer. So I think that's what we need, is people to just put their bodies on the line and put their freedom on the line. Do whatever it takes to stop the fossil fuels for them.
Let's go to Matt.
So it's interesting to note that although oil production has gone down in the Niger Delta, like a lot of stolen oil has been refined there, and you end up with worse pollution than is what is done with the corporations that are extracting it, because you have people without technical ability doing that. But my question that I'm curious about is a particular event that happened in the news a few years ago, which was the Earth Liberation Front blowing up a bunch of Hummers. And I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that particular event, whether you thought it was effective or worthwhile, because, I mean, to me it seemed that one, generated a lot of animosity towards people who are concerned about the Earth, and also it just made those people buy new cars. So.
Right. I totally agree with you. The question was, what do we think of the Earth Liberation Front, and particularly in action that they took a couple of years ago, burning SUVs or Hummers? I have a lot of respect for people willing to do that sort of thing because of the courage it would take. That's one side of it. Another side of it is that was a completely not strategical move on their part. I don't know, like you said, the people just bought new cars maybe.
They have stopped making Hummers.
They have.
But I mean,
But I don't think it was because of them.
Hummer 2s and Hummer 3s, so I mean, it's not like they really stopped at all.
Yeah. What's different about what we're talking about here in the Earth Liberation Front? The Earth Liberation Front is sort of the underground action we're talking about, without any sort of cultural support, any sort of above ground movement talking about strategic spots. They're not, because those Hummers, those 3 or 4 Hummers, are not part of the most green contributors to climate change, to the prospects of catastrophic climate change. We can talk about many different industries that we know are more responsible and culpable for us talking about the Venus syndrome. So it's just that action wasn't strategical. Those people had a lot of courage, obviously, to do that. But yeah.
So you're talking about strategic action, and I like that because it's basically applied destruction to manifest something that is positive. He was addressing the backlash that comes along with that kind of radical action, where you are doing that. There are a lot of religious groups and religious ideologies that shun that kind of behavior and really discredit it. There's also a lot of just kind of media backlash and also social backlash with that. So you're talking about building like an educational base on the above, I think the above ground. So, yeah, I think that's good, but you also think that just having groups that aren't necessarily associated with any kind of thing like that acting so that they can't be targeted by some sort of backlash, like independent thing.